Matthew chapter 7. This is the last week that we have in between our sermon series. So we start next week with our new series on Rediscovering Church, Rediscover Church series. And we get to talk about the essentials of why we do the things that we do, and why are we a community of people the way that we are, why we gather together, what are some of the foundational truths about the church. And so that starts next week. But I'm really happy and excited to bring you this message today, because this is also very foundational. This is an essential question that each one of you must answer in your life, and the question is, what is your foundation? And I'm going to ask you this, and just to prep you, at the end of the sermon today, I'm going to ask you to make some decisions, okay? And so just to give you a heads up on that, you're going to be challenged today, and I hope that will be a good thing for you, and that you would make some decisions, and God would change you even today through the preaching of His Word. I looked up some famous, famous foundations. And one of the most famous ones isn't famous because of how good the foundation was. It's famous because of how bad the foundation was. What's this called? Leaning Tower of Pisa, not pizza, Pisa. And it was built in 1173. And it took 200 years to complete it. Just think that the guys that started working on it died, then the next guys died, and the next guys died, and they finally got to see the end of it. And the problem is they built on a marsh, and they were building a bell tower for the church in Pisa, and it never came to fruition. And they've had to put countermeasures on that building. They've had to run cables on that building. You can go into that building up a little ways, but it's not being used for what it was created for. That was a bad foundation, right? And so there's foundations of buildings, physical structures, all have a foundation. And what about a country? What's this? The Constitution of the United States. You guys were quicker than the first service, so you must have studied, right? And this is the Constitution. Who can quote the Constitution right now? Let's just see who can. Okay, nobody. The first service, we had 3 people that did it, so it was really amazing. No, the Constitution is a good foundational document for our country, and it's a foundation upon. There's certain truths, there's certain principles that our country is founded upon. And so whether you're building a building, even a country, you have to have a foundation. How about a church? Now, I'm not talking about a physical structure of the church. I'm talking about us as the people of God. We read about what the foundation is in Ephesians chapter 2. Look at this. So then, you are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone, in whom the whole structure being joined together grows into a holy temple in the Lord. In him you also are being built together into a dwelling place for God by the Spirit. So our church is here. Our church exists. The foundation is Jesus and the apostles' teachings. The foundation isn't a person with a good charismatic personality. Our foundation isn't the music that we use to praise God. The foundation isn't the nice seats that we use to sit. The foundation isn't our social equity programs that we have to make sure to help people. Our foundation, the thing that we are all here for, hopefully, are you here for this, is Jesus. Jesus is the cornerstone, and we're in the apostles' teaching this morning because this is the foundation upon which our church is founded. This morning I got up and I looked at Facebook, and Facebook really for me now is pretty much just to look at the memories that pop up. You know that? And you look at the memories, and the memory that popped up this morning, I'm not making this up, the memory that popped up this morning is I posted, hey, wanted to thank everybody at church. Today we get to move back into the house, the church house, the parsonage. So we lived in a church house, right? And the church owned this house, and the church, as we moved back in like 14 years ago, whatever, on this day. And the problem with the church house is the foundation was bad. and it was made out of cinder blocks. And you could go downstairs into the basement, and you could look outside through the cracks in the cinder block of the foundations. That's a bad foundation, isn't it, Fred? Yeah. And bad things happen when you got that. The basement would flood. We had mice all over the place running around. You know, the harvest time would come, the corn would be cut down, and all the mice would come to our house, and it was like a big party. And I remember one time I was downstairs, and there was a cable that ran downstairs up to the first floor, and it was about a 90-degree cable. I mean, just 1 degree, not 90 degrees. And I saw a mouse running up that cable. That has nothing to do with the message. I just saw, I don't know why, but it was terrible. But so what the church did is they picked up the house, and didn't know you could do this, and then they dug out the whole foundation. Then they poured a new foundation and set the house back down on top of the new foundation. And problem was solved. No more mice, no more flooding. It was beautiful. And so we moved back into the house. So foundations are important. How about your life? Do you think about your life like, what's foundational about my life? Like, who am I when nobody's looking? Like, what do I believe when nobody's informing me what to believe? Like, what's my basis of existence? What's my foundation? Today we're going to be talking about building your life. Having a life, and I'm praying, a life that you will say is founded on Christ. And so let's go to this text in Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 through 27. Just for context, this is the Sermon on the Mount. This is the biggest single chunk of the teaching of Jesus in one place, the Sermon on the Mount. And this comes at the end of the sermon when he's already delivered teaching that has never been heard before or since. And he uses this illustration to talk about what you're going to do with the teachings of Jesus. Look at verse 24 of Matthew chapter 7. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house. But it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. Let's start here, number one. These men both wanted to build something. They both set out to build a house. That's what they were going to do. And both of them wanted to have a home, wanted to build this thing. What are you trying to build? What are you trying to build in your life? How many people here, you go to the gym? Raise your hands. You go to the gym. Okay, a couple of you do. Yes. Kinda. I saw that kinda. And some of you go to the gym and you're trying to build an incredible physique like your pastor. And you're trying to do the things. That wasn't supposed to be funny. I didn't know. You're trying to do those things, right? You're trying to work out hard. You're trying to build something. You're building your muscles. You're building your strength. How many people here are trying to build a career? You got a job and you're working hard at it, and you want to get to the next level, and you want to get promoted, and you want to do well in your job. By the way, these aren't trick questions. Like this, these are good things to want to build. How about you're building a marriage, right? And you're doing the things in your marriage to love one another and to understand one another and to live with each other in a good way. And so you're building, you're working on it, you're going to counseling, you're trying to get some help through it, and you're trying to build a marriage because you ultimately want to build a home. You want to build a family. You want to build a family where the kids can be safe, where the kids can learn about Christ, and the kids can grow in their faith, and you can shepherd them and lead them. And then maybe some of you're experiencing what it's like to send a kid off to college, and that's a little hard because they're going to go off and do their own family and their own life, and that's healthy and that's good, but it hurts a little bit when they leave, right? And some of you are experiencing that, but you want to build a home. How many people want just to have a good life? You want to have a good life. And you want happiness, and you want joy, and you want all the good things, and that's a good thing. That's a good desire. Sometimes I think in the Christian community we have this sense of like, man, I feel guilty if I want something good. You know who made good things? God. He's the giver of all good things, and he gives good things to his people. And it's a good thing to enjoy the good things that God gives us. That's a great life. How about a godly life? You want to build a godly life. You want to do the things that God asks you to do, and you're working on that. And you're here, unless somebody drug you here, you're here because you want to do that. There's some part of you that wants to do the good thing. And you want to serve God. You want to live for the good. You want to do the thing that God has designed you to do. And ultimately, that's to bring him glory in the way that you live. What are you building? Here's the application of this first point. There are no shortcuts in life. Things don't automatically happen. There's no pill to take that will get you ripped and jacked like Mr. Olympia, okay? There's no pill that you can take. Even steroids won't do. You still got to work out, okay? And you got to put the work in. You got to put the time in. There's no entitlements that are going to get you to the place where you need to go. And we've had a lot of entitlements. Unless you live in COVID time, then you get entitlements all the time. I went back and looked at the finances that we had from during the COVID time. And we got so many checks from the government. I couldn't believe it. I dare you to go back and check your finances and ask yourself, like I did, what happened to all that money? Where'd that money go? But there are no entitlements that are going to get you to the place where you want to be. It's going to take hard work. It's going to take building something good in your life. Now somebody says, well, I'll just win the lottery. That'll take care of my problems. That'll take care of my finances. That'll take care of everything. And so winning the lottery is not going to happen. And if that's your plan, that's a bad plan. You're going to count on the lottery. Powerball is 1 in 300 million chance of winning. 1 in 300 million. And we can't grasp those numbers, but it would be like 2 football fields side by side, and there's about 300 million blades of grass. And so somebody goes out and paints 1 blade of grass, and you go out there and just pick one at random. That's the odds of winning the lottery, okay? And you say, well, I'm not going to play the lottery. That's a waste of money, and then that's true. But here's the thing: people are counting on hitting the lottery of life in different areas of their life, in your education, in your home life, in your marriage. It just doesn't automatically happen. And guess what? It doesn't automatically happen in the Christian life either. These men both wanted to build something. Number 2, these men both went to the same school. They went to the same school. The school was the teachings of Jesus. Jesus says this in verse 24, everyone who hears these words of mine and does them. So the school is Jesus' teaching. And we know fully, we can see the fuller picture, it's the life and the work, the ministry of Jesus, and the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. It's who Jesus is. It's what Jesus has done. It's Jesus' teaching. That was a school that they went to. And so if you look in the Sermon on the Mount, let me just give you a quick recap of these teachings of Jesus. First of all, Jesus teaches about a Christian's attitude. Starting in chapter 5, he talks about the Beatitudes. A Christian has a different way of thinking. A Christian's attitude is different from a non-Christian. There is a difference. I listened to a part of Joe Rogan's podcast last week. He had Hulk Hogan. You remember Hulk Hogan? Hulkamania? Yeah, brother. And he was on there, and he was talking about how Jesus is his Lord and Savior. I had no idea about that. And it was a recent development, but although he'd been in church his whole life, and he talked about the church that he goes into down in Florida. I've been to that church, and he kept saying, Jesus is my Lord and Savior. Most people think that Jesus maybe was a good teacher or he was crazy. Most people think Jesus was just a Jewish man that lived 2,000 years ago. Some people think that Jesus wasn't even really a man. A Christian thinks differently about Jesus. They have a different attitude about Jesus. Like Hulk Hogan, Jesus is my Savior because he died for me and he rose again, and he's also my Lord. Because of that, I'm going to live for him. I'm going to obey his teaching. And you have a different attitude about Jesus. Do you know that Jesus, do you believe in Jesus, that he died for you? He died on the cross, not because the Romans arrested him and put him to death. He died on the cross according to the plan and purposes of God Almighty, that he might bear the sin of God's people, that whosoever would believe in him would not perish but have everlasting life. You trust in Jesus that he bore your sin. He took your sin on the cross. You don't have to pay for it. He bore it, and he gives you his own righteousness. And so now, because of this truth, you're thinking differently about the words of Jesus, the works of Jesus, who Jesus is, and he's coming again. Jesus is teaching about different attitudes in the Sermon on the Mount. He also is teaching about different actions. So not only do you think differently, you begin to live differently. Jesus says in verse 13 of Matthew chapter 5, you are the salt of the earth. He talks about being light of the world. And so not only are you different in the way that you think, Christian, you're different in the way that you live. It's not that you're perfect. It's not that you won't falter and fail and fall, because you will, but you are salt in this world. Salt makes things taste better. Salt is also a preservative. And that's how you are to be in your world, where you're at, in your job, in your home, in your community. You're to make things better as a Christ follower. You're to be a light in a dark place. You're to live for the truth. How's that going? He talks about attitudes, actions, and he also talks about affections, Christian values. He talks about being generous, not because you want to be seen, in chapter 6. He talks about how to pray. He talks about fasting and why you would fast. Christian values, different things. And then lastly, the Sermon on the Mount deals with aspirations. Aspirations, what a Christian wants to become. In chapter 7, he starts talking about, don't judge people for having a speck in their eye when you've got a log in your own eye. Take care of yourself. That's an aspiration for a Christian, that I'm growing in my faith, that I'm dealing with my stuff. It's so easy to look at other people's stuff and to point, and it's actually much more fun to do that because I don't have to look at myself, honestly. But as a Christian, our aspiration is that we'll be growing in our faith, we'll be growing in our relationship, that we're a different Christian than we were a year ago. We're closer to God than we were a year ago. And as I preach this message, just to be open and honest with you, the message is being preached to me. I want to be a better Christian than what I was. And sometimes I preach words that are a lot easier to speak than to do. But a Christian has some aspirations. A Christian wants to become something. A Christian wants to become more like Jesus in their life. This is the school, this is the teaching of Jesus, and both men received this, or they heard it. They heard it. Third, these men both weathered the same storm. Now, I think it's the same storm because Jesus uses the exact same description in verse 25 as he does in verse 27. You see that in the text? The rain fell, the floods came, the winds blew and beat on the house. Same storm. I think these guys are living in the same neighborhood. And the storm rolls in and it hits both of them. You will get hit by the storms of life. You will. One of my pet peeves is when I see pastors or preachers, or I hear them, or see them on TV, or that they package Christianity or following Jesus as a way to have a great life free from the troubles of life. And if you come to Jesus, you will not only be saved and forgiven for your sin, but you're going to have a prosperous life, and you're going to have a wonderful life, and you're going to have a trouble-free life. And not only does my experience tell me that that's not true, also Jesus tells me that it's not true. Jesus says, in this life you will have trouble. And so we're not immune to the storms of life as Christians. And if you're not a Christian today, but you're thinking about it, I want you to come to Christ, because this is the best possible life now and for eternity. But there's no guarantee that you will not face trouble. You will face trouble, and you might face more trouble because you're a Christian. And that's just the honest truth. That's what Jesus told us. Storms will come, and you'll be hit by them. It's like living in Florida during the hurricane season. We're almost coming up to hurricane season, and you see the hurricanes, and what do? They show out the models, and they have like all the lines. It could go here, and then it could make landfall here. And so sometimes we have relatives in Florida. Sometimes they get hit really hard. Sometimes they kind of get grazed. Sometimes it's not very windy, but they get a lot of rain. There's different problems that happen, but everybody in Florida has to have hurricane insurance because the storms are a sure thing. They're coming. That's life. That's life. Let me just ask you this. Raise your hands. I'm not going to ask you what the storm was, but how many people could say that in the last year you've faced a storm of some sort? Raise your hand. Let's see. So lots of people, right? And somebody has said you're either in a storm, coming out of a storm, or going into a storm in life. And so hurricanes have names. Let me give you 5 storms of life that we face. How about this one? Financial life, financial storm. You don't have enough money to make it to the next paycheck. You're struggling even to put food on the table. You definitely can't take the vacations that you see everybody else taking on Facebook. And then you go into your job and you lose your job. And now you got to find a new job. And what am I going to do? I got bills coming. I got things to pay. How can I take care of my family? Financial storms. How about this? Accidents. You get a phone call in the middle of the night and your life changes forever. Storm of life. How about relational storms? People will fail you. People will hurt you. People will gossip about you. People will lie to you. People will not be compassionate toward you. People will not be concerned with your life. People will let you down. Your pastor will disappoint you. The people sitting next to you will let you down. It happens in the church. Relational strife, brothers against brothers, sisters against sisters, arguing over finances, over family values, over relational storms. How about health storms? Health storms happen. You start to grow older, you begin to realize that your body is not what it once was. And how many people here, you don't have to raise your hand, but how many people here, you're in the golden years, but if you're being honest, they're anything but golden. Because you can't do the things that you like to do, you can't do the way that you used to be able to do it, and your body is failing you. And there's health issues, and then there's the last one, death. There's a storm coming, it's called death. And it's death of loved ones, yes. We've experienced that, but it's also your own death. There's a time coming where your life will be gone. And even though our medical community is amazing and the amazing things they can give to help with the dying, it's still a storm, a terrible storm that's coming that everyone has to face. Death. And I've been at the bedside of many people in that storm. And even though there's been some beautiful things that God does around that, make no mistake about it, it's a raging storm. These men both weathered the same storm. And then here's the crux, here's the climax, number 4. These men were not the same. These men were not the same. See, the storm first revealed their construction. It revealed how they built the house. In Luke records it. He says that the wise man, he dug deep, he said, and laid the foundation. And then in Luke, he says that the foolish man built without a foundation. So the foolish man, he wanted to build a little more cheaply. He wanted to have a little bit more money for the living room and the fireplace. He wanted his house to maybe look a little more grand than the neighbors. And so he built cheaply. He built on the sand. without a foundation. The wise man, he took the time to put a good foundation in. It's going to cost a little extra, but he knew it was worth it, and it was. The storm came, the storm blew, and wind and beat against their house, and it revealed how their house was made. Now, this storm actually is revealing their character. It revealed their character. The one is called wise. Now, we're reminded of what the Hebrews taught about wisdom. Wisdom was not merely knowledge. Wisdom was knowledge applied to your life. That's wisdom. It's knowing some stuff, but it's doing the stuff that you know. And that's what makes the difference between the wise and the foolish. I love all these passages in Proverbs that are talking about the wise man, the foolish man, and that's wise and foolish women as well. And in Proverbs chapter 4, listen to this instruction about the importance of wisdom. Verse 5, get wisdom, get insight. Do not forget and do not turn away from the words of my mouth. Do not forsake her, and she will keep you. Love her, and she will guard you. The beginning of wisdom is this, get wisdom. And whatever you get insight. Prize her highly, and she will exalt you. She will honor you if you embrace her. She will place on your head a graceful garland. She will bestow on you a beautiful crown. Hear, my son, and accept my words, that the years of your life may be many. I have taught you the way of wisdom. I have led you in the paths of righteousness. When you walk, your step will not be hampered, and if you run, you will not stumble. That sounds like a good life. That's the way of the wise. To hear the truth, believe it, and then live it out. Wisdom. To hear the words of Jesus, to see the works of Jesus on the cross, risen, empty tomb, and to live it. That's wisdom. Now, foolish man, the Greek word for a fool is literally a stupid man. And he knew what was right. He had all the teaching, but he wanted to cut corners, and he wanted to do it his way, and his house fell. And it was a great fall. In Proverbs chapter 26, we read this description of a fool. I love it. It's called the Easy Reading Version, ERV. And it's a phrase-by-phrase translation. You can check it out. I love it. It makes some passages that are harder to understand more clear. It makes this one very clear about the fool. Just as snow should not fall in summer, nor rain at harvest time, so people should not honor a fool. You have to whip a horse. You have to put a bridle on a mule, and you have to beat a fool. Hard words. There's no good way to answer fools when they say something stupid. If you answer them, then you too will look like a fool. If you don't answer them, they will think they are smart. Any of you had that conversation before? Never let a fool carry your message. If you do, it will be like cutting off your own feet. You are only asking for trouble. A fool trying to say something wise is like a crippled person trying to walk. Showing honor to a fool is as bad as tying a rock in a sling. A fool trying to say something wise is like a drunk trying to pick a thorn out of his hand. Hiring a fool or a stranger who is just passing by is dangerous. You don't know who might get hurt. Like a dog that returns to its vomit, a fool does the same foolish things again and again. The foolish man, his house came crashing down. He refused to hear the words of Jesus. He refused to believe in Jesus, and his house came crashing down. Jot this down. Storms have a way of showing what you're made of. Storms have a way of showing what you're made of. The storm revealed the construction of these men's houses. The storm revealed their character. The storm reveals what you're made of. And maybe I'm talking to somebody right now. You've put on the Christian face for a long time, maybe for mom and dad, maybe for your kids. And it's a facade. When the storm comes, you'll be shown for who you are. about 22 years ago, and I said this the first service, and I didn't know that my sister was going to be here, and now she's going to be embarrassed because I'm telling a story about her. But I remember this because this is one of the big storms in my life, in her life for sure, in our family's life. 22 years ago, my sister was having headaches, and things were going bad, and not knowing why such bad headaches, and going to the doctor, and they thought it was one thing, and it was not that thing, and it was another thing, and no answers. And so one morning, I was home after college, summer. She wasn't getting up. And now, it's not that uncommon for somebody in their early 20s to sleep in a little bit, right? And so you just kind of let them sleep, and all of a sudden it was like, I don't know what time, but it was getting late in the morning. It's like, we got to get her up. Well, she wasn't getting up. She couldn't get up. And so the ambulance had to come and take her, went to the hospital, and then had to airlift her to a bigger hospital to find out that she had bleeding on her brain. And so she had to go into emergency brain surgery to save her life. And the doctor said 50-50 chance that she would live, and then after that, she could be a vegetable in her. And so she made it through the surgery. Well, afterwards, the doctor said, well, she has a brain tumor. And it's inoperable brain tumor. It's in the place where she thinks and speaks, and she can't mess with that. And so then you start looking at the numbers, and you start seeing the statistics, and 95% of everybody with brain cancer is dead within 2 years. That's the numbers, the bad numbers. And so we began praying for her, and began calling out to God to heal her. And the elders of the church came, and the book of James says, and anoints her, pray for her. And yet she's not getting better. And I remember talking with my dad in the kitchen one day, and I said, but Jesus says that whatever you ask in my name, I will give it to you. And why isn't he healing Heather? Why isn't he healing her? And the storm was raging, and it began to reveal some things about my attitude. And my attitude was one that maybe some of you have, was that here our family had lived for God. We served God. Mom and Dad loved the Lord. They're serving God with their life, and we were doing the things that we should be doing. And how could you, God, allow this to happen? You could heal in a second. Why have you allowed this to happen? And the storm kind of revealed that I had a sense in me that God owed me something. God owed us something. And it was difficult. And we talked about it and prayed. And here, 22 years later, she is still alive. And God did heal her. But here's the question. How would I have responded if she didn't make it? The storm reveals the reality of who we are. And you're going to go through the storms of life. And if your foundation isn't Christ, you're not going to be able to stand. I got an illustration to show you. I'm going to ask Greg to bring this up here. And because I had a problem with it the first service, but we'll see if it works this time or if it just crashes and burns. I love this gift. Thanks, Greg. This gift, as a little kid, this is just great. You know this gift, how these works. And it's a punching bag. You're a little kid, you're like this tall, and you can't come up, and you can punch these bags, and they just keep coming back, right? Punch it, and punch it, and punch it. And if you do it too much, it'll spring a leak like it did in the first service. And it also did that, which is really not the point of the illustration. If you get really hard, then it stays down. That's not good, okay? It's supposed to come back up. The reason why it comes back up, though, is because in the base of it, there's a weight. There's water, in this case, or sand that you put in it, so that no matter how much this gets hit, it keeps popping back up. It's a great gift for a little kid. And you know what? It's a great truth for every person, young and old. You're going to get hit by the storms of life. Sometimes you're just going to get glancing blows. Other times it's going to be massive blows. But those who have their foundation as Christ will always stand. Oh, you'll be battered and bruised, bleeding even. But for those whose hope in the Lord, they will stand. This is the foundation that we preach and proclaim to you. There's one more storm that I didn't mention. And it's after the storm of death. It's called judgment. And this isn't fear-mongering. This is reality. I love you, and I want you to know the truth. And the truth is that you're going to have to stand before God and give an account for your life. Everything that you've done. Good, bad, ugly. And you're going to have to answer to this holy God who's full of justice and righteousness and wrath towards those who do evil. And that's a scary thought. But the promise of Christ is that on the cross, he bore the wrath that was meant for your sin. He took it on himself so that you then could have his righteousness. So that when you stand before God, you have Christ's righteousness on you. You're justified, just like you never sinned before God. And that storm is not a storm. It's a day of rejoicing. So what about you? What are you building your life on? Maybe you need to do business today and you need to come to Jesus. And maybe you've been here and listening, and you've been maybe even putting on a show for family or friends, but the tower is leaning. You're not doing the thing that God created you to do. You're not the bell tower for the church in town. You're a tourist attraction. And when the storm comes, you're going to be done. You need to come to Jesus. And for others of you, be encouraged today. You might find yourself in the midst of a storm. Trust in the Lord. He'll see you through. He'll see you through.